As you know, on Sunday night or Monday morning of every week, we post a new expository semiotics explaining why we would choose which lectionary readings. But in these readings, our dream is, and our desire is, to help you read the signs and fondle the details and spot the seminal metaphors, the condensed signs and the stories that are key for preaching to a digital culture. So strap on your seatbelt and join us as we prospect our passages for today. This is the lectionary passage for the 5th of September, 2021. And we have some great ones with some classic themes that come out of them, like the Isaiah 35, 4-7a. And it starts with, "Say to those of a fearful heart." And then this wonderful, wonderful lyrical passage that was the title of one of the best-selling Christian books of all time, "Streams in the Desert." Isn't that a beautiful phrase? That God provides for us streams in the desert. We also have a reading from James, and I'm going to be dealing with that just as part of this, but James 2, 1-10, 11-13, 14-17. The very famous passage, which I was almost tempted to spend some time on, with the Syrophoenician woman and the daughter that needs healing in Mark 7, 24-37. And who cannot have fun with the spit image, the compote that Jesus makes with the spit, and how he recreates in some ways with that the very creation of humans in Genesis 2, as God created Adam. And we are this clump of clay that God scoops out of the ground. You mix dirt and water, or in this case spit, and you get something special. But I want to really take seriously, and this is going to be a strange one here that I pick this, but I want to pick Psalm 146, and I'm going to tell you why I want to pick it, because I think Jesus loved this psalm, and I'm going to prove to you why he loved this psalm. Now, remember, psalms are meant to be sung. You never would say a psalm, so these are songs. And when you're just learning them, you don't learn them, you learn them in tune and in a tone and with a certain melody. And here's the phrase that I want to focus on in Psalm 146. This pericope 6-10, but here's especially 6 and 7. And I'm not going to say it. "Who executes for the oppressed, who gives food to the hungry, who sets the prisoner free. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the stranger. The Lord upholds the orphan and the widow. The way of the wicked he brings to ruin." Now, the reason why I want to pick on this and park on it a bit is that this is the very theme that Jesus chooses for his first sermon, for his inaugural sermon, and what he itemizes as a 5 points mission. Now, when you think of 5 points, what do you think of? If you've been trained theologically and been to seminary, first thing that comes to mind, 5 points of Calvinism. All right. TULIP, the tulip people, the 5 points Calvinism. Tulip that was kind of consolidated and coalesced at the Synod of Dort and early 17th century. T, total depravity. U, unconditional election. L, limited atonement. I, irresistible grace. And P, perseverance of the saints. The 5 points of Calvinism. So when you talk about 5 points, you think of, in the church at least, in Christian circles, you think of these 5 points of Calvinism. In the more cultural sense, you think of something else. You think of 5 points of Manhattan, where these four streets came together and they collided in this morass of misery and disease and poverty. And the 5 points is the place where every missionary wanted to go in some way to deal with the pain and the suffering that you found there. You also think of, in a different way, you think of the 5 points of a couple of cities that are now multicultural hotspots. You got the 5 points of Nashville, you got the 5 points of Denver, some of those exciting places to live and to shop and to eat are these 5 points. So 5 points today means exactly the opposite of what 5 points did in the 19th century, the 5 points of Manhattan. But the 5 points of Jesus, they come out of his first sermon. So you remember the story. He has this coming out sermon at his hometown of Nazareth. And this is a village of very small, a couple hundred people, most of them relatives. And he was asked to speak in the synagogue, of course, partly an outdoor shelter that was made for this purpose and then taken down every week. Remember, he was given the scroll of Isaiah, handed the scroll. They took it from the ark, gave him the scroll. He was standing in front of a table, and he gets to pick whatever passage from Isaiah he wants. And he chooses Isaiah 58:6 and Isaiah 61:1-2. And he unrolls the scroll that they brought out from the ark. And then he finds the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor." Number 2, he has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners. All right. This is a mission manifesto here. The 5 points of Jesus' mission manifesto. Number 3, he has sent me to recovery of sight for the blind, which is a euphemism to bring healing to the sick. Number 4, to set the oppressed free. And number 5, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. In other words, a precise summary of the psalm that we just read. Now he's doing this. What is really unique is he's carefully culling and crafting this collation of 2 passages from Isaiah, but they're not even in scriptural order. No, he takes Isaiah 61 first, and then he does 58. So I think it's just so part. These psalms have been so part of his life. He's just so marinated his mind and in the scriptures that he reorganizes things, and in many ways he reorganizes them along the lines of the psalmist here. You find this other places as well. You find another place in the scriptures, but these are Jesus's 5 points mission. Now, the brilliance here is that Jesus doesn't make these points into points. He makes each one of these points into stories and into narratives and into metaphors. He doesn't preach his whole life a 5-point sermon, but it begins with these 5 points. Good news for the poor. If the gospel is not good news for the poor, it's not good. It's not the gospel. It's not good news. And he puts the poor number 1. Number 2, healing for the sick. We're going to just go over these again, and I'll say a little more. Release for prisoners. Remember how important this is for Jesus. And he proves it at Golgotha. Number 4, liberty for the oppressed. And then number 5, and this is the one I will spend a little time on it. Someday I'm going to do a whole LenTalk just on this one thing right here. To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And that is a shorthand description of Jubilee. Jubilee. And I think in many ways Jubilee is a better word for us to use today than kingdom. Jesus came to inaugurate jubilee. So here we go. You ready? Real quick. Number one, good news for the poor. It all begins here. Now, Jesus had two things. Two things about the poor. He said, the poor you always have with you. But that's not a creed. That's a confession. That's a way of saying this is how bad we are. It's a confession of our sin, that we are not putting this number one, as Jesus put it number one. Number one in his mission manifesto, good news for the poor. In early Christianity, this was integrated in their life. They didn't do charity events. They didn't have fundraisers for the poor. No, their liturgy, the very word liturgy, liturgia, it referred both to, this is the first century, both to a form of worship and the way in which the needs of the poor were met in the life of the community. You could not separate worship and church like we've done today. I'm going to worship. Well, or I'm going to church. We really mean worship. But worship and church are different things. Church is the community, the way it lives and interacts and loves each other. And the two senses of this word liturgy connect in the very definition of what it means to be the body of Christ. Liturgy and social action. Or as somebody put it, the altar and the soup kitchen. They're one and the same in how we do liturgy. And the radical and new mode of living that resulted from this. This is Basil of Caesarea, who lived in the early 4th century, died in 379. I'm quoting him, 4th century. When someone steals another's clothes, we call them a thief. Should we not give the same name to one who could clothe the naked and does not? The bread in your cupboard belongs to the hungry. The coat unused in your closet belongs to the one who needs it. The shoes rotting in your closet belong to the one who has no shoes. The money which you hoard up belongs to the poor. That's how serious they were. And why this is number one. Now, I think it's a mistake to define poor in monetary terms. Poor is also relationships. It's also resources. It's a much broader category. A poverty of relationships, poverty of resources. It's got to be expanded just, I don't have any money. But the mystery of the Eucharist itself brought in the poor into every lived moment. And it is to be the same for us today. You submit daily to God by giving from what you have for the benefit of everyone in every way you can. So, missions manifesto number one is the lifting up of the poor. It's good news for the poor. If it's not good news for the poor, then it's not the true gospel. Number two, the healing of sight for the blind is a particular phrase that connotes the way in which Jesus' Mission Manifesto is to be a healing gospel. It's to be a healing gospel. We talked before, sozo Jesus, the Greek word for salvation and health and healing is the same word. But when we think of sozo, we think of the healing. Like here in the healing story with the Syrophoenicians, a woman's daughter, we think in terms of individual healing. And we think of it in terms of personal ways. And we should, but the key to healing is not just a person, but it's a community. I'm going to give you Wendell Berry here. I believe that the community is the smallest unit of health. And that to speak of the health of an isolated individual is a contradiction in terms. In other words, the healing of the person depends on the healing of the community. That can one person be healed and the community be sick and not be well? And so we've got to bring in this 5-point mission statement that you find here in the Psalms and in Jesus' inaugural sermon. We've got to bring in the communal dimension. Now, the third one is setting captives free, visiting the prisoner. How many sermons have you ever heard on prison ministry and on how many times have you ever been to a prison? Have you had a prison? Do you have a prison ministry in your church, or do we just give it to a parachurch and say you take care of it and we'll give you some money? No. The issue of setting the captives free visiting the poor and the prisoner, and entering into a relationship with them is part of is number 3 in this mission manifesto. And Jesus proves it on the cross. Who's the first convert in heaven? A convict. Think about it. The first convert in heaven. Today, you will be with me in the garden. Or in paradise, it's the same word. In the garden. Yeah. In the new Eden. In my Eden. And the first one to get there, under Jesus' authority, is a convict, a prisoner. John Wesley was a fundamentalist about this, and some of his itinerants and lieutenants said, do we really have to go to the prisons? And it's awful. And do we have to? And John Wesley, he put it like this. He said, yes, you will visit the poor in their hovels. Yes, you will visit the miners in their pits. Yes, you will visit the prisoners in their cells. And then he stopped. He said, God's already there. God will be with you. Hey, we don't bring Jesus to these places. God is already there. The question is, are we going to join what God is already doing in these hovels and pits, in mines and the prisons? And then set the oppressed free. Now, in the mind of the Hebrews, when they heard that word oppressed, the whole story of slavery in Egypt came up. And so it had specific meaning for them, what it meant to be a slave, literally a slave in Egypt. But oppressed is a larger word than that. Have you ever felt oppressed? I didn't say depressed. I said oppressed by the world. Oppressed by sickness, oppressed by financial circumstances, oppressed by anything that has weighted you down. Then Jesus says, come to me, all you who are oppressed, weary and heavy laden and oppressed by life, and I will give you not more work. That's what the church says. More work. Come on, join us, and we'll give you. No, and I will give you rest. I will give you rest. I'm going to give you a mission, but my burden is light. Take my yoke. And by the way, the Isaiah 58 passage, that Jesus uses in his coming out sermon. There is the talk about the yoke. Part of the oppression is that you are binding yourself in these cages. Norman Rockwell never portrayed himself as a painter, only an illustrator. But he did admit, I'm going to quote here, this is his quote, every time they come out with a new art movement, I try grimly to follow it. In other words, whatever the artistic fashion is, he's going to try and see if he can do it too. However, when I put brush to canvas, alas, it always comes out Rockwell. Isn't that great? It always comes. Are you always coming out you? Or are you trying to come out somebody else or some celebrity or some preacher? No. Does it always come out you? And if it doesn't always come out you, that's called oppression. You're living under oppression. No. Have it come out you. The one of a kind, original, unrepeatable, irreplaceable you. And then the last one. To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. This is the 5th of Jesus' 5-point mission manifesto. To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. That was a shorthand phrase, or a longhand phrase, if you will, for Jubilee. Now, Jubilee was a tradition that was never, as far as we know, a ritual, if you will, that was never practiced, but it was kept alive as a hope throughout Hebrew history. And it's based on kind of some sacred algebra. Some numbers had sacred meaning in the times of the Hebrew, and they were as much sometimes metaphors as to be taken literally. And we still do this today. I mean, I'll be there in a second. Now, you don't mean a second. you mean I'll be there as fast as I can. Give me 10 minutes. Now, it doesn't mean you start the clock and the 10 minutes rolls. No, it means you're going to get there as fast as you can. It won't be too long, but it's going to be a little longer than you may want it to be. So we still use metaphors like that. And, whether Methuselah, 969 years, did it mean exact 969? Well, it could have. Or did it mean he was so old, he was so ancient of days, you can't imagine how old he... Okay, so, but this is how the ancient peoples used numbers. And numbers had meaning, and they were very important. And 7 was the most perfect numbers, the number of completion, the number of perfection. You have 4 corners of the earth and the Holy Trinity, 3, 4 plus 3, 7. So it's a way of talking about the completion, the perfection, the encompassing presence of God. 7 huge in the book of Revelation. You got 7 churches, you got 7 angels, you got 7 seals, you got 7 trumpets, I could go on and on. So 7, but when you multiply 7 times 7, whoa, you get 49. And so 49 is the perfection squared. All right. But then when you always add 1 to it, okay, like 7 plus 1 is 8, the 8th day of creation, a metaphor for God's new thing that we're starting over and doing a whole new thing, a new heaven and a new earth. It's the same with 7 times 7, 49 plus 1, 50. And that was called Jubilee. The 50th year, the year of Jubilee, was the time when things would start back over again. And at least 3 things would happen in all the discussions of Jubilee. These 3 things would happen. That the prisoners would be released, all the land would be restored, and all the loans that were charged would be paid back, and and we would have the land would lie fallow, and not be harvested. So the land would rest, the poor would be freed, the captives would be released. The other points of Jesus' manifesto here are covered in this Jubilee, as Jubilee accomplishes the other points in the 5-point mission. Now, this concept of 50, of starting over, of returning things back to the beginning, as I said, it had never been implemented, but it had always been a hope. And that hope was seen as waiting the Anointed One's arrival. In other words, the inauguration of Jubilee would come with the Messiah. And so when Jesus, this is the thing that really made everybody at his kind of inaugural sermon so mad, is that he was proclaiming that he would be the one that would announce and bring forth the day of the Lord's favor. It was his way of signaling that I am the long-awaited one, the anointed one, the Messiah. I am Jubilee. In many ways, Jubilee is a better way of talking about the kingdom than, because it's not something like the kingdom. Nowhere in the Bible does it say you build the kingdom. No, the kingdom is a gift. It's a presence that you enter. It's an ethos that you participate in as a gift, as a reality that's already begun by somebody else who is Jesus. Jesus is the kingdom. And here we have this understanding of Jesus is Jubilee. The Jubilee one, Jubilee Jesus. Is Jesus your Jubilee? Is Jesus the Jubilee of your life? A Jubilee is when we start over and the hopes and dreams are there to be fulfilled. The impossible becomes possible in Jesus, the Jubilee. The 5-point mission, the mission manifesto. Churches have spent a lot of time developing mission statements. I know churches have spent 2 years working on its mission statement. But Jesus began with a mission statement. And it's not a bad one for the church to embrace, to proclaim good news to the poor, to free the prisoners, to heal the sick, to rescue the oppressed, and to announce the year of the Lord's favor, Jubilee. Semiotics is the art of angling, of turning things askew, upside down, inside out, cattywampus, sunny side up, over easy, scrambled, hard-boiled. We hope you enjoyed today's journey, but always remember, it's more important you prepare the preacher than you prepare the sermon.